Is there alien life out there somewhere? We've all looked up at the stars and the planets and thought, I wonder, what are their intentions? How would this affect religious belief? And I was a religious person for decades. Wait a minute, what if it wasn't just about humans on this planet, hand created by the creator of the cosmos? What if that creator had created something else elsewhere in the cosmos? What's that about? These are fascinating discussions, and my special guests are going to speak to that and a whole lot more. Jonathan M.S. Pierce is an author and philosopher from South Hampshire, UK. He co-founded the Skeptic Inc. network, and he's written a ton of stuff. He's written a lot of books, too many to list here, but a couple include Why I Am an Atheist and Not a Theist and 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God. Dr. Aaron Adair, he is a physicist, an educator, and a Bible scholar. And it's interesting to see those things paired together. Physicist, Bible scholar. I guess it's possible. He is currently a research affiliate at MIT. He has done work that has included the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or CERN, and the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI. 10 years ago, he wrote the book, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View. And these two gentlemen have now collaborated on something that I find fascinating, a book called Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, assessing the impact of discovering extraterrestrial intelligence on religion and theology. When I think of aliens, I think about the History Channel. And this is not a compliment. It used to be, we called it the Hitler Channel because everything was the Second World War, right? Every show was but there was some actual history going on as we would learn about the mid-20th century, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, they just sort of left the rails. And now it's ancient aliens and the pyramids and all of these conspiracy theories. And I don't see any history on the History Channel. And so when I hear aliens, that's what I think about. Is that the case for you? I mean, does your brain ever go there?
Well, I have to say that Aaron, my co-author, one of his favorite channels is the History Channel. He's a massive fan of ancient aliens. He does advocate for aliens building the pyramids. So it was a quite difficult process writing this book because I had to get over the fact that he had these completely nonsensical conclusions.
Always good to establish credibility off the bat, right here at the beginning, Aaron. He felt the aliens built the. No, come on, talk to me about ancient aliens and the History Channel, Aaron. What's your take?
Okay, so I think Jonathan's just a little bit confused because when he says aliens, he means anyone who's not British. And yes, it's true that not British people built the pyramids. They're called Egyptians. Yeah, so you're right that in the olden days, it was the Hitler Channel. But even back in the olden days, they still attached occultism with Nazism and things like that right from the beginning. So they were never exactly pristine. But of course, yeah, nowadays, the most historical stuff is Ice Road Truckers or the things like that. The Ancient Alien Show is at best a bunch of, hey, it's possible that, and so long as I can somehow say 10 different competing hypotheses for the same artifact, all of them related to X kind of alien, it's enough to keep those speculations going.
We found a man who has been studying this for 35 years, right? That's how they frame it. We're like, oh, impressive. They don't tell you that, the guy thinks that that Stargate was a documentary and that the aliens are going to come down. And the reason the pyramids exist is because they needed a place for the landing pad for the spaceship.
Yeah, it entails him sitting in his underwear in front of the Ancient Aliens TV show itself. That's some kind of big circle of.
Oh no, they're not wearing underwear. They have a much better persona. They usually will dress up like Indiana Jones. That is the norm to give credibility. If you look like 1980s Indiana Jones, automatically think, oh, you must be an actual archaeologist, not a cosplayer.
It's almost like watching a homeopath on television where they wear the scrubs and they actually have the stethoscope. Somehow in the brain, we're supposed to say, aha, yeah, scrubs and a stethoscope. You must be doctoral. How technical is the book? And this is a setup because I have the book. I know the answer, but I want you to talk about it because you two are big brains and you're technical people. Most of us are not. So when you get into extraterrestrial life, the cosmos, life, the universe, and everything, how hardcore are we talking here, gentlemen?
Well, we have things that are scientific, mathematical, theological, philosophical, but I think we do a good job of making it so as many people as possible can read, understand, and participate in this conversation. We have sections of the book, especially in the appendices, that's just like pure math and computer simulations.
Essentially, I made him put the formulae in the appendices. It's just that's not going in the main body of the book. I'm sorry, mate, it's not happening. So we reserved English for the main body of the book. All the books I've ever written, one of my kind of raison d'etre in kind of what I do is trying to communicate sometimes complex ideas or research that's been, written by so many different authors, and try and distill that into kind of layman's terms so that an intelligent layperson can read my books. And this is, I think, another one of such books. And Aaron and I worked hard to make sure that because he would actually submit stuff to me of a scientific nature, mathematical nature, and I'd say, look, mate, we're going to have to break this down, like for my benefit as much as the readers. So I think we've succeeded in doing that. I think it does a job of spreading itself across many different areas and topics that are relevant to this question. And it touches on maths, science, aliens, cosmology, philosophy, theology, psychology. Hopefully in a way that people can understand.
And I agree. I mean, I can validate that. There's a lot of storytelling. I really feel like that if we're going to educate and change minds, even our own, I think storytelling is really one of the great ways to do it. It's like Sagan, right? Carl Sagan was a scientist. He was all about the data, but he was also great at telling the story of science and skepticism, etc. Allow me here to quote none other than Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis, young earth creationist, Bible literalist, and somewhat terrifying human being who has this on his website. And I quote, "I do believe there can't be other intelligent beings in outer space because of the meaning of the gospel. An understanding of the gospel makes it clear that salvation through Christ is only for the Adamic race, human beings who are all descendants of Adam." I would just, for the hell of it, like both of you to respond to Ken Ham's declaration that we're it, the center of all things, because, the Bible. You want to start me, Jonathan?
Well, actually, I guess one of the questions we were seeking to answer with this book is the discovery of intelligent alien life, does that make the existence of omni-God more or less probable? It's a really simple question. Is God less probable if we discovered intelligent aliens? And the conclusion to the book, the TLDR, is, yeah, God is less probable. But it may be a problem that is greater for that type of Christian, that kind of literalist, conservative, very, doctrinally narrow Christian. And I think so if you have just a general belief in God, there are a few things that can go wrong. If your belief in God has got so many bolt-ons and so many constraints, then actually it leaves it open to being more easily invalidated. So the discovery of things like intelligent alien life is therefore going to be more of a problem for someone like Ken Ham than for your average kind of liberal Christian who's like, yeah, and can find a way of adapting their belief system to that. And that's where kind of psychology comes into it a lot as well.
Well, let me speak to the philosopher in you. You think much of that is about the ego? I mean, we are God's main point of focus. Therefore, come on, if something else existed that might minimize or marginalize us in some way, you think there's some ego at play?
Well, actually, there's a huge element of that in what we talk about in the book that's connected. I wouldn't say it's necessarily individual ego. Well, it might be a manifestation of that, actually, which is earth chauvinism. This idea that, in a way that we were geocentric in our understanding cosmology, theologically, we're kind of homocentric and anthropocentric, geocentric. And the idea is that we are the apex of creation. It's all about us. And if there are intelligent alien life forms out there, then that's going to play merry havoc with that. And especially, and Aaron can talk to this, especially when you introduce something called the Copernican principle, which would state that actually we're fairly average. I don't know, Aaron, if you want to explain that.
I think it also leads into, when it comes to the history of interpreting Copernicus and our place in the universe, that Kenham would have found company with other religionists in the Christian faith up to about 1600, in that one of the early Copernicans, Giordano Bruno, also posited that there is an infinity of worlds with people on them. And apparently this was one of the things that made this the Inquisition go, yeah, that ain't right. Go to the burn at the stake. From what we could tell, one of the reasons Bruno was executed in 1600 was for the belief in other worlds and people on them. So basically, we know at least one person killed for religious reasons for believing in aliens. And yeah, part of the reason there was this fear of those ideas is that if God created this world, great. But if this world just pops around naturally just from atoms bumping into each other, well, we're not special. We're not created. And also, yeah, how does the story of Jesus work if does he only come to Earth? Does he have to go to many places? Again, historically, and connecting this to American history, one of the people to really push the idea and show how much silliness this might create if Jesus needs to somehow do his saving act on every single inhabited planet in the universe was the great Thomas Paine. In his book, The Age of Reason, he basically points out, look how silly it is that now we basically have to have Jesus incarnating, dying, rising, and doing that over and over again for every single sun that happens to have inhabitants around it. It means there could be billions, if not trillions, of Jesuses.
I was listening to you talk about those heretics of old who dared to say that, you know, we weren't the center of all things. Of course, Galileo is the easy one, right?
The story of Galileo is definitely complicated. He did end the rest of his life in house arrest. And when he was being interrogated by the Inquisition in Rome, he was shown the instruments of torture. So basically you could say, you know, he was psychologically tortured because he's going to show it's like, hey, you're going to, you know, start talking the way we like, or all these instruments, which we explained how they work. These things could happen to you.
Yeah, it would be a moment of pause. Hey, we're going to tear you apart and set you on fire. Now, what's your opinion about geocentrism? I mean, I'd be like, you know,
Yeah.
wow. You know, go figure, you know, I mean,
Yeah. And in fact, if
can-
I could further connect it, the
Yep.
cardinal that basically did like the final prosecution of Bruno, Cardinal Bellarmine, was also then the cardinal who basically started the case against Galileo.
And I mean, for hundreds, even thousands of years, we have seen legitimate scientists, people doing groundbreaking work. It wasn't just this, you know, the primitive ancestors wandering in the dark. We knew quite a bit, right?
There were contemporaneous thinkers at the time who had an understanding, plausible understanding of how cosmology worked, and the idea that. So we talk in the book, there's a section on biblical cosmology and how it just gets it completely wrong. The Bible gets the understanding of cosmology wrong. And why would God and what we call omni-God, an all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, use this, you know, supposedly perfect or divinely inspired revelation to communicate with the world, but get the basics so fundamentally wrong? And one of the arguments back to that is, well, you know, people wouldn't have understood it at the time. It's kind of progressive revelation argument you often see with slavery as well. Oh, they wouldn't have understood that. They wouldn't have understood at the time that slavery is bad. So, you know, that's why they didn't say slavery is bad. It's like, really? No, there were contemporaneous like efforts to you know, change and adapt the rules in other places concerning slavery. So I'm not too sure, but Aaron, I'm sure, can tell you about how there were people at the time who had a much more enlightened understanding of how cosmology might have worked, and so therefore it doesn't work as an apologetic to say, yeah, they wouldn't have understood it if God had actually told the truth in the Bible.
But you can't throw that out without me grabbing onto it. The Bible got so much wrong about cosmology. I mean, I want him to read the book. I want everybody to read the book, but give me some of the highlights. Come on, the stuff that makes your eye twitch when it comes to the Bible dealing with out there.
So how about the pillars of the earth, or the firmament being in the Hebrew arakia, this hammered out piece of metal that holds up the waters above to separate from the waters below, as if outer space is just a giant swimming pool, and the stars are just these little lights plugged into that metal case around the earth. that is there just for signs and seasons, that somehow the sky is just an oversized calendar for us humans, rather than, hey, those stars are just like our own sun with their own worlds where people could be right now having similar or better conversations that we are having on Twitter. These are places to visit, but they're just little lights in the sky. When in Genesis, it just says God, he made the stars also. And I'm thinking, our single galaxy alone has on the order of 400 billion stars with a B. And our galaxy is one of at least hundreds of billions with a B galaxies in the observable universe. And observable, that those are the limits of how far we can possibly see. We may have a universe of infinite size. So would you just dismiss that all to he made the stars also? Oh my goodness. You are missing the big picture.
I love it when Aaron gets excited. It's just brilliant.
He's good. Yeah, he's good. Just a digression. I'm always interested in Genesis 1, where God creates all the plants, trees, vegetation before the sun, right? So that I think surface temperature would have been at least minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
In the early Earth, there were lots of grow bulbs. That was going on.
I mean, I love, similar to that, I love and we talk about this because we talk about whether if aliens exist, are they intelligent? If they're intelligent, are they moral? If they're moral, are they fallen? If they're fallen, do they need atonement? If they need atonement, does it need to be incarnation? So on and so forth. So we go through all these steps, but the idea, in the biblical accounts, is that Adam and Eve, whether you believe they were historical and literal or symbolic, is kind of neither here nor there. But it's certainly in the literalistic understanding, Adam and Eve were told not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So they had no knowledge of good and evil, and they eat from the tree, and then they get punished for eating from the tree, but they didn't have the knowledge of what's good and evil. So that is a really big issue in terms of the coherence of that very core story.
A friend of mine and fellow activist likes to phrase it this way. He says, God created imperfect beings and then punished them for acting imperfectly. I just thought, well,
that's one of the big. Well, so that's, sorry to derail this with the previous book, but my book, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design, looks at exactly those sort of arguments and says, what is going on for this omni-God,
Talking here with Jonathan M.S. Pierce and Aaron Adair. They are co-authors of the book Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, assessing the impact of discovering extraterrestrial intelligence on religion and theology. Trying to decide if I'm going to say the subtitle every time I talk about the book, but I might. I had a friend who he wondered if there might have been an Adam and Eve on another planet. I mean, why would we have the only Adam and Eve, right? I mean, if God designed the vast cosmos, he conjured it from nothing, why all the extra stuff? Is there a different Adam and Eve, and they would be aliens to us? That means alien civilization that might sin and fall. And then does Jesus go and die for their sins? I mean, does Jesus finish up here and go, shit, now I've got to go to City Alpha 5 or whatever? You guys get into any of this sort of hypothetical stuff about
that's one of the biggest areas that we get into, actually. So we looked at a paper by two Christian theologians called McIntosh and McNabb, and they looked at 6 areas that they thought could potentially pose a problem for Christianity, for Christian belief. And we looked at those 6 areas. So they are the scriptures, the doctrine, the belief in theism in general, narrative, problem of evil, and so on and so forth. So we looked at all these different areas, and one of them, the doctrine area, obviously has loads of your big chunky bits of theology and that we could get our teeth into. And one of the big arguments in that, and this exists amongst what are called astrotheologians, who are theologians who deal with exactly what this book is about. This is a book about astrotheology, amongst other things. And one of the big questions is, does one Jesus work for everyone? Is there one Jesus to rule them all, or do you need a billion Jesuses to be incarnated in all these instances of intelligent alien life? And then all the problems that go along with that, and with each of those, because actually astrotheologians they disagree on this point. And so we sit back and look at the criticisms that single Jesus advocates have about multiple Jesus And then we look at the criticisms that multiple Jesus advocates have about single Jesus, and we just eat the popcorn and go, right, yep, you're all right, and it's all nonsense.
It's that the church wasn't splintered enough. Now we have people who believe in one Jesus, 10 Jesuses, a million Jesuses. I mean, come on, it's just crazy. Aaron, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, so when it comes to the thoughts about are there worlds that don't actually even need a Jesus, in many ways, there were some important thinkers who were ahead of us, like C.S. Lewis had a trilogy of books that basically imagine life on Mars, life on Venus, and it was untainted by sin of us pesky humans. In fact, when us humans accidentally showed up, the Martians were like, well, get them out of here. They're just going to mess everything up. They're the fallen people. Go away. Of course, if there are worlds that are unfallen, that's a bit of a theological problem, because it's like, wait, God could have made us in such a way that we wouldn't screw up. Then why are we like this? On the other hand, if one were to say, no, all forms of intelligent life will fall and screw up. It's like, wait, so God fails every single time? Well, there's a grand engineer for you. So one way or another, it seems like whether we are the only sinful people in the whole universe or we got lots of sinful cousins, it seems like that's a theological issue. And then, yeah, if Jesus needs to basically just come to one world and do his magic, or if he needs to be like Scott Bakula in Quantum Leap and just keep regenerating into other bodies to, try to solve those sorts of problems, is an interesting question and problem.
And there are loads of issues. Sorry, there are absolutely loads of issues that come with each of these. But
yeah.
the million, billion, trillion, infinite Jesus scenario has, of course, countless issues in terms of, well, actually, you would also need Jesus to not only be incarnated at all these different places and possibly different times, but also at the same time. There will be civilizations out there who are existing at the same time as us that would need to be kind of saved in the same way. And so therefore Jesus would need to exist simultaneously in perhaps billions of different galaxies.
I'm going to get into this has got to be wild conjecture, but it'll be fun. I'm classic Trek fan. I know Aaron is because of his freaking Zoom background, but Roddenberry was looking for a way to economically create alien interactions in the show, and they came up with a class M planets theory, which means, well, if alien life develops, they're going to look a lot like us. So then you can, bring in we need a female dancer alien. Well, they bring in a female dancer and spray her with green paint. Now she's an alien kind of thing. But we all sort of have that similarity. Alien life, I mean, can we even comprehend what that would even look like, how we would approach it, if it could be communicated to using our method of language and perception? I mean, my mind explodes when I think about this stuff. What kind of life might be out there, guys?
Yeah, when it comes to, you bring up Star Trek, and in Next Generation, they had to create a conceit for explaining why are all these humanoids all over the galaxy, and they had to credit it to some other advanced species billions of years in the past that then just seeded that kind of life everywhere, which, by the way, contradicts evolution. So science fiction stopped being scientific again. Oh no. The more reality is that if aliens are out there and they're intelligent, we don't really have good prima facie reasons to think they're going to look like us. But there could still be some similarities. Like, if they're intelligent, they're going to need energy to perform any of their great tasks. So we can still put civilizations on a scale of their energy production and control in a way so we can compare more and less advanced. If they are understanding the way the universe is, well, that's also something that we can put on a scale, that we can have a common way of discussing things, that we may have very different forms of bodies. The slug people of the southern side of Omicron Persei 8 are certainly going to be looking different from us. But so long as we're inhabiting the same universe, we should find some ways of pointing to the same object and agreeing enough on a language to talk to each other. Not to say it's going to be easy. We're going to need quite the upgrade to Google Translate to make it happen.
You guys hear about the Google, I guess, has a new earpiece which acts like a Babel fish in real time. So if you have a smartphone app and you're speaking to someone who's, I don't know, they have a foreign language, and you both have the app, as you're speaking, it's translated in your ear in real time. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, I never thought of Douglas Adams as a soothsayer, as predicting the future, but he kind of was. It was amazing. Jonathan, you want to weigh in on what aliens
Well, actually,
look
something.
like out there?
Okay. I was going to weigh in on something you just
No,
said.
no, no.
Then,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Take
well,
that
actually,
journey,
so
man.
the idea that science fiction is quite predictive is quite useful in. So when we're looking at how will humans react to aliens turning up or us discovering aliens with a signature from far, far away, so on and so forth, you're thinking, well, we don't have any experience of that. But then actually, do we? So one is science fiction. We look at science fiction, and actually it can tell us an awful lot about how we might react and about what aliens might be like, etc., etc. Because it's a really great it's a great area of where lots of writers and thinkers have done a lot of thinking and writing in terms of what might alien life be like and how might we react. And then we look at things like history, just look at history and how did civilizations react like the Aztecs when the conquistadors came over? What happened when Christopher Columbus founded the new world or discovered the new world? And then what can we learn from that and how we might react in if we came into contact with alien life, so on and so forth. So there are analogies, there's history, there's science fiction, and that can all help us to understand how humanity might react in terms of the discovery of intelligent alien life.
But if I see, let's say I can detect that it's a living organism, but it's some weird energy goo. I don't know what the hell it would even look or sound like. Like, would we know even what to do with it? Like, do you communicate? Do you know if it's intelligent, but communicating on a frequency that we could never receive? I get overwhelmed by these types of questions.
Well, we do try approaching very broadly something that's scientifically and philosophically very difficult. What is intelligence? Which is an all the more pressing question considering the advances in artificial intelligence and people wondering, is that thing intelligent or not, or is it just an extremely good parrot? It's an open question in that community, and we're not going to answer it today, even though obviously we have the correct answers. But when we try approaching how we would identify intelligence, we take a definition to basically say, does it show the signs of having agency? Does it show that it's actually moving towards certain goals and actioning on those, changing to achieve those sorts of things? Like if there's some sort of goo on the ground and it's trying to go forward to some sort of source of food, and I put my hand in the way, and then I notice it goes around my hand to get there, I'm like, okay, this has some very basic agency, to say the least. So even if I cannot comprehend its biochemistry or its neurosynaptic pathways or things like that, I can still make some observations, say like, well, that's what I expect from an intelligence. So while I may not be able to communicate with the slug people, I'm hoping I can at least notice that they're intelligent, and all the more so if they decide to come here and with their superior intelligence decide we need to do something for them.
No, if aliens came here, there's a great cartoon and it shows these aliens that have arrived at the moment of Christ's crucifixion. And the first thing they see when they get off the saucer is they see some poor dude who's nailed to a cross. And one alien says to the other, "What do you think?" And the alien says, "I think we need to get the fuck out of here," is what I think. If aliens appear, do you think our predisposition to want gods, do you think we'd see them as gods? You think religions would develop around aliens?
Well, there's possibly something that might be quite useful to think about here, which is Arthur C. Clarke's third law, which says something along the lines of something of sufficient technological advancement to you will appear like magic. So, for example, when you had the conquistadors with muskets sitting atop horses with metal armor, things that the Aztecs had never seen before, and they fired the muskets, a flash went off, and then someone dropped dead at a distance. They're like, oh my goodness, that is magic. That is just insane. And yet to the conquistadors, that's pretty standard. Now, Aaron can talk to you about what would be required for aliens to actually come across galaxies to land at our planetary shores. But the technology that they would require to do that would seem divine to us. They would be able to do things that would seem pretty godly to us. So there could be situations, and there are cargo cults where we can look at and see, well, actually, that kind of thing has happened before. There could be scenarios where humans would find alien life forms to be possibly godly.
Aaron?
And it's worth noting, we have UFO cults right now. We have people who are effectively worshiping extraterrestrials, or at least they're worshiping gods in an extraterrestrial form. I've had a few interactions more recently with people from the Raelian cult. Rael was a Frenchman who said he encountered aliens from a landing flying saucer back in the 70s, and basically learned that the gods of the Old Testament, the angels and such, the Elohim, those are actually aliens. Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, all aliens. And they're all coming back in 2035. So they're building the embassy to welcome them when they finally all come back. And while the cult might be small, it's still nonetheless, hey, people are worshiping and practicing these sorts of new age UFO religions, even without the aliens actually showing up. You can only imagine all the more so if they decide to land in front of the United Nations or anything like that. And yeah, we have several analogs of when a group comes in with superior technology of some sort, leaving quite the impression. Jonathan mentioned the conquistadors, but even in the 20th century, we have some really good analogs with the so-called cargo cults of Micronesia, where they started creating these new gods named John From, short for John from America, also known as Roosevelt. President Roosevelt became a god in these sorts of religions. And also a more British example, Prince Philip the second also became a god in one of these religions, that he was supposed to be a brother of one of these other gods from these cargo cults. So they were looking at all this, technology of just the 20th century and thinking like, hey, we want that sort of, amazing technology. And so this religion forming around, they saying, yeah, our messianic figure will come in and he'll give us refrigerators and air conditioning and Spam meat in a can and all these sorts of things that were absolutely amazing in the 1930s and 40s, let alone, modern stuff. So I'm pretty sure that if the aliens did show up, there would be a significant contingent of people would be like, the gods are real, they've just landed, and start abandoning some of the other religious practices. At the very least, there's going to be a boom time for the UFO cults.
It's interesting. If Jonathan and Aaron and I, let's say we were all able to go back in time and show people 200 years ago a working cell phone, they might have considered us gods, right? I mean, we could have totally cashed in that chip, right?
I've often thought about that. You lie in bed thinking about these different situations where, like, if I went back in time with this, but if I could keep it, if it could hold its battery, and I could do things and show them stuff, and it would just be, I'd seem like some magician to them. It would be insane, but yeah.
So they might think they might call it magic or witchcraft. I mean, I think I said. So people like to talk here. This is a political conversation about the founding fathers, and they're often treated like deities. They're very saintly in the eyes of a lot of American nationalists. And we always try to remind them they did some amazing and visionary things, but they were also, they lived in a time where women,
slave owners,
they weren't given positions of power, and they owned slaves. And I think Washington actually had slave teeth in his dentures and blah, blah, blah. You do all that stuff. And when the Second Amendment was written, it was written during a time when they were ignorant about so much. They could have never imagined this or that. And so if we had gone back and they had seen Wi-Fi, they might have thought it was witchcraft. You just never know. It's just so beyond what they thought might have been possible. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. It is worth noting that in America, Washington technically is a god. If you go to the rotunda at the Capitol and look up, there's a painting of what is literally called the apotheosis of George Washington. So Washington has ascended to heaven and become a deity to watch over the land of liberty and bald eagles and Super Bowls and all those, important things that we need to spread around the world. But I would also note, we don't necessarily need super advanced technology to convince people to worship us. There's this example that is in the 1st century AD that's in the writings of Josephus and shows up in the book of Acts, where Herod Agrippa basically comes out with a really shiny coat and people start worshiping him as a god. So all you really need is just a really fancy coat and boom, you're a deity.
Man,
awesome. I was going to say, sorry, Seth, you mentioned something earlier. I mean, both of you talked about slug people and the idea of aliens being so different to how we are. Actually, that is a problem that we deal with in the book with regard to the single Jesus advocates. So if they say, right, there's one Jesus to do all the job of atonement, and there's just this one story, how do all these intelligent alien life forms out there, these civilizations, access that story then? Because if I could be pretty certain that if we were kind of shown a story of some tentacled alien that was sacrificed and had, you know, some tentacles chopped off or something, we wouldn't feel that empathy that we do for other humans, right? Because that's part of our psychology. You know, those mirror neurons, the empathy, and is biologically kind of attuned to allow us to have sympathy for those who are more like us, right? And so therefore, that the particularity of the Jesus story being based parochially in our geography and time and on our Earth possibly conveys a huge advantage to us that other alien life forms just won't be able to get out of that. They won't be able to have that empathy in the same way that we couldn't empathize with a Jesus who was tentacled. So
now I'm thinking about it. I never hadn't considered it before, but if a Jesus had to go and atone for the sins of the slug people, then that Jesus would have to be like a slug Jesus kind of a thing. And so instead of dying on the cross, they would just, like, somebody poured salt on him. Or,
yeah, he was salted for your sins.
He was salted.
Don't encourage him.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Jonathan M.S. Pierce and Aaron Adair, who are co-authors of the book Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide. Many of our gods throughout history have been elemental gods, sun god, moon god, astrotheology. And we know that human beings have an evolved kind of a gravitation often toward belief, some of it rooted in infancy or even pre-birth. And we seem to have a predisposition to associate the cosmos with the gods. Is that a scientific question, a philosophical question? Have you tackled the question, either one of you?
Let me take this first from a math point of view, because one of the things I tried to do was compare how much energy it would take to actually get a spaceship from one planetary system to another if it came from another sun and came to our world. And I realized if they launched something at us that could reach a significant fraction of the speed of light, so that way the time wouldn't be so extraordinarily long, I realized, wow, the amount of energy that they would need would mean that their civilization would be at least 1,000,000 times more powerful than ours. And that would put them on energy levels equivalent to, at a bare minimum, forces of nature. So if aliens come here in their spaceships, they will have the energy resources of literal thunderstorms and earthquakes and things like that. So it's like, in a very real way, they would have the power level of the gods imagined before. Thor would look up and say, like, damn, I got nothing on these guys.
Jonathan?
Well, actually, and I'm going to defer you back to Aaron here. So there's also the idea that our cosmology, or our astronomy and our astrology, is very much linked to our understanding of gods, and indeed God. So the biblical God, there are elements that are particular to our understanding of the skies that have found their way into the Bible. Now, if this is like the story, is the revelation, then that's quite problematic if it's particular to just our understanding of what we see where we are. Aaron, did you want to talk to that?
Yeah. Let's talk about everyone's favorite character from the Bible. That's the bad boy of the Bible, our friend Satan. His other name being Lucifer, but the name Lucifer comes from the Latin for the planet Venus when it's rising in the morning. So Lucifer literally means light bearer, and that's a way of referring to the morning star when it's rising up early just before sunrise. The thing is, the only reason we have a morning star is an accident of our location of the planet and just a little bit of geometry. The fact that the planet Venus is closer to the sun than Earth is in our mostly circular orbits means that you'll only ever see Venus basically on the horizons at sunrise and sunset. You can technically see Venus during the day, but you need to know exactly where to look, and it has to be really special conditions. I mean, you're trying to basically look at someone lighting a match when there's a whole bunch of spotlights pointed at your eyes. It's a very difficult thing to do. But the fact of the matter is, this idea of Satan being called Lucifer is this idea that there even is a morning star, and that's just an accident of our astronomy. So if Earth were actually the closest planet to the sun, if, say, Venus and Mercury weren't there, there would be no morning star. And so how can the prophet Isaiah refer to the Babylonian king as, oh, you morning star are going to be thrown down? It's like, well, there is no morning star. We don't know what you're talking about. And then you're going to name the devil after that. It's like, wow, that's really confusing, to put it mildly. So whatever religion the aliens might have, unless they have identical planetary systems to ours, they won't have the same astronomical visions and mythologies that we have developed by sheer accident.
This is quite similar to something called the problem of particularity, which is connected to the scandal of particularity. So the scandal of particularity is this idea that the only way to access salvation is through Jesus. So what does that say if you're an alien from a different galaxy? Like if the only way to access salvation is through Jesus, again, it goes back to this, well, is that our Jesus? Does this Jesus do it for you? How do you know about this Jesus? How can you access this story? And would it mean the same to you? So all of what we talked about before, or do you need your own Jesus, so on and so forth? And the problem of particularity is that the idea that so much of the Jesus story, again, if you are a theologian who advocates for the single Jesus idea, then so much of that story is based in a particular place in a particular time. It's very parochial, and there are 613 mitzvahs, so these laws in the Bible that even now we have. So the problem of particularity is a problem irrespective of aliens, right? So it's someone in the Amazonian rainforest. How do they understand the moral diktats of the Hebrew Bible that talks about, you can't have wool and linen together, you can't mix wool and linen, you can't eat shellfish, you have to get circumcised, all these kind of things. You're like, well, that really doesn't speak to me. It doesn't speak to me as a modern person in the UK, let alone someone from here or someone from there. And then you're kind of expanding that issue out to other civilizations in other corners of the universe, and that problem is even more emphasized, I think.
And just to highlight how that is, imagine if we discover the planet of the echidnas and they want to join Judaism, and then they tell them about circumcision, and they'll be like, well, one or all four of the heads of our penises, because we got a bit of a different anatomy down there. Just one of the oddities that will happen if we try to explain and involve a grander community into these very parochial religions.
Circumcising the slug people does provide a lot of logistical challenges. It's a visual I now regret having in my brain. What are you trying to accomplish with this book?
That's a good question. I think initially it's like, oh, what if? And answering the what if. And since the area of what we're interested in different ways, Aaron and myself, what's the probability of God existing? Is God likely or not? And we look at, in the book, we look at abductive arguments rather than deductive or inductive arguments. So abductive arguments are inferences to the best explanation. To me, hopefully to Aaron as well, it's fairly obvious that when you look at all these areas and all these ramifications of the discovery of intelligent alien life, that actually, that kind of omni-God, that particularly these narrower versions of God, they're just less likely. There's just more problems if you introduce these other life forms.
Well, let me stick with you for just a second. Do you speak at all to the idea of the watchmaker, deistic, something is out there kind of a God? The spiritualist says, well, what if? I mean, do you address that at all?
The thing about deism is that realistically, there's no difference between deism and atheism. Like if you've got a God that's created everything and then just sits back and doesn't interact at all, such that God is effectively invisible, then it doesn't really matter whether that God exists or not. There's no meaningful difference between atheism and that kind of deism, I don't think. Would you two agree?
No, I'd agree. I mean, for all practical purposes, plus if we're talking about affecting positive change and moving people toward, humanism on this planet, it's not the deists who are trying to change laws and frighten children with hell, etc. Right? I mean, I'm not worried about the deists personally. Aaron?
In many ways, we kind of also do address the idea of deism, because if the idea that the deist is also believing in some sort of all good God, the problem of evil, rears its head again, and we actually do some computations to show if aliens merely exist, it makes the problem of evil worse. But to me, perhaps the most interesting thing that we did with the book is showing just what will change for humanity, and especially, for the religious traditions, because they're going to have to change. We looked at some of the studies about cognitive dissonance that were actually first done on a UFO cult back in the 1950s. The book by Leon Fessinger, When Prophecy Fails, prophecy that aliens were going to come and save all the good people, whatever else was going to be destroyed. Well, as you can tell, the 1950s came and went, and, well, the end of the world didn't quite happen. But that religious group still held on and believed even more fervently. So we know disproof or intellectual difficulties don't end religions. It just causes the message to change. So we're curious, how are religions going to have to adapt? Which ones might, pick up new followers based on the discovery of aliens, and also depending on, are we discovering them that they just barely exist in another galaxy, or are they hovering over the moon right now? That will make a big difference. And for me, perhaps one of the insights that became so poignant was when we were trying to project out, well, how many cosmic neighbors might we have in the Milky Way galaxy or the rest of the universe? And our suggestion is we probably do have neighbors somewhere, but they're probably not close, which means that it becomes absolutely amazing if we do discover aliens with our current means. Because if we did discover them now, that means they'd have to be way more numerous than we might first estimate. And the only way that that can be true is if they are extremely long-lived civilizations. And the beautiful thing is that observation, coupled with the Copernican principle that says if we're just average and we find out the average lifespan of these civilizations is tens of thousands of years, we've got a huge, beautiful future ahead of us just being the sea students of the galaxy. So I find a beauty of what that discovery could hold for us, merely knowing we are not alone.
So as we draw things down here, what I'm inferring is you think there's something out there. You think there's life out there. Like the probabilities are too great. There is life elsewhere. Am I hearing that?
I think a lot of this depends on what your understanding of the size of the universe is. So it seems to me, at any rate, that the bigger the universe, the more likely it is that intelligent alien life exists out there. And if you advocate for an infinite universe, then there's going to be infinite instances of intelligent alien life. The issue is that I would say they are quarantined by distance, or we are quarantined by distance, is that the distances are so vast between these instances of alien life forms that there's no realistic hope of, high-fiving each other, let alone having techno-signatures that reach each other. And if you've got an expanding universe that makes it difficult for light to reach certain areas, then this becomes even more difficult. So my conclusion would be, yes, there's almost certainly intelligent alien life out there. There's almost certainly loads of intelligent alien life out there. Just it's quite a long way away.
Yeah, we actually created a way of trying to run simulations based on our current scientific knowledge and ignorance, and combined in a equation that's very famous, known as the Drake equation, named after Frank Drake. He created this back in the 1960s, a way of estimating how many neighbors we might have right now in the Milky Way. There's a lot of those factors that are still unknown, but we have ways of dealing with that uncertainty, modeling our uncertainty in those results. And basically, it's extremely unlikely that we are alone in the entire observable universe. And my estimates would put us at basically 50-50 chance if we have galactic neighbors.
Last thing, and you've been very generous with your time, and I will link the book in the description box, hoping everybody supports it and checks it out. But, as Aaron's a Trek fan and you're the philosopher, I was always told, and I think I may still buy this, truth is stranger than fiction. You've explored, you've looked out as best we can into the cosmos, and you've done the math literally, and you've gotten into, the human imagination and what we can conjure in our minds. What do you think? Is truth stranger than fiction? I'll start with you, Jonathan.
Well, I think truth is often predicted by fiction. When you look at where I was having this conversation the other day, and someone was telling me who knew a lot more about ChatGPT and AI and stuff than I do, and actually it's fairly scary, because before you know it, it's going to be Terminator, and there are going to be autonomous drones flying around having wars, and science fiction predicts predicts the future. I think, you know, you look at so many things that come to pass, and science fiction writers have predicted that already. So I think it's not that truth is stranger than fiction. I think it's that fiction predicts truth quite often.
There are some people, I think, who dismiss my concerns about AI. I'm reminded of that line by Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, right, where scientists were so obsessed with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. I feel that way about AI in many regards. That's probably a whole other show.
Well, I will remind you the other important statement by Ian Malcolm that can give us a little bit of hope, because life finds a way.
I don't know. Truth and fiction. You want to finish us off here, Aaron?
I have seen some fictions that ain't going to be true. The human imagination can be amazingly diverse in what concepts can be in there, but on the other hand, it's also restricted. It's still lacking all the possible experiences that our brains could have. So what we might imagine now, I have a hard time believing it will be the same thing that we imagine 1,000 years in the future, in the same way 1,000 years past, it was so hard to imagine all sorts of things. But again, the human imagination has been ahead of itself. We had, 3,000, about 2,500 years ago, you had people like Democritus already imagine atoms. You had Epicurus already taking that idea of atoms and imagining other worlds and life on those other worlds. The idea of aliens is quite ancient. In some ways, our science is finally caught up with that bit of imagination.
Seth, can I add two things in there?
Ahead.
First of all, just on the AI front, our book cover is actually the image of the book cover is designed by AI. It's DALL-E. So Aaron put in a couple of terms into that, and it came up with an image. And now we've lost a designer a job. So that's good, isn't it? And the second thing is to what Aaron was talking about how and what you said, Seth, is that 1,000 years ago maybe people didn't predict actually where we are at now. This is a really interesting topic for discussion in terms of theology, biblical exegesis, prophecies. Right, one reason why I can categorically say that the prophecies of the Bible are a load of bunkum is that at no point in the Hebrew Bible did they predict mobile phones, like intercontinental ballistic missiles, hoverboards, PlayStation 5. They're just like, we predict a war between two factions and one of them wins. Well, whoop-de-doo, Brilliant, great prophesying there.
Well, don't even go that far. Like the Apostle Paul couldn't even predict the existence of the 21st century.
No, this is a whole other show.
This is a whole other show.
We'll have to hook up again. When we're in the bunker and Skynet is flying its assassin ships overhead and we're looking for some time to kill, I think we should get together and talk again about AI and about the best and worst of technology, which I think is a hugely relevant topic. But it's an amazing book. Yes, I'm really impressed, and I really am impressed by how you've been able to write it in a way that allows the rest of us to play along. Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, Assessing the Impact of Discovering Extraterrestrial Intelligence on Religion and Theology. Jonathan M.S. Pierce and Aaron Adair, you're both very kind to join me. Thanks for coming.
Absolute pleasure.